gambling and risk-taking, or technology risk-taking and gambling seminar. I forget the order. It's TRG, so I remember that. I don't think we have any housekeeping this week. We have, I think, maybe 1 or 2 more weeks of this seminar to come. So if there is something that you wanted to present or put together that you haven't had a chance to reach out to us yet, there's a little bit of time to do that. But if not, I think we're going to wrap this up in a couple of weeks. We still have a couple of great sessions coming up. But yeah, that's where we are. So as all of your semesters come to an end, we're just going to give you guys a little summer break from us as well. So that will be nice for everybody, I'm sure. But as for today, we have an excellent set of speakers that will be sharing some insights around gamification in video game streaming. And for those of you who have no idea what that is, you are going to hear a lot of really new and novel and interesting things today. And we will also link some of the seminal work of our 2 speakers in the show notes, so you can read more about it after the session. But as far as introductions go, allow me to first introduce Mark Johnson. Mark Johnson is a lecturer in digital cultures in the Department of Media and Communications from the University of Sydney. And also joining us for her 3rd appearance, if I'm counting correctly, on the TRG seminar is Dr. Brett Abarbanel, who is the Director of Research at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. The International Gaming Institute there, of course. So I've introduced the speakers, I've introduced the topic, and what I'm going to now is hand the conversation over to Mark to give us a high-level overview of the issue. So Mark, the floor is yours.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for the intro. Hi all. So this talk is in essence about sort of how game live streaming platforms are increasingly using kind of gambling style methods or systems to kind of boost user engagement and also to do a bunch of other stuff too. So in essence, I'm going to do a kind of very quick look at Brett and my research on this topic, and also just to kind of give a sense of what Twitch is and what sorts of gambly-esque systems we see on Twitch, as lots of people might not be familiar with this platform. And that'll just take a few minutes, and then we'll shift to a Q&A after that. So I'm just going to share my screen, and hopefully you'll all be able to see these slides. There we go. Does that show for everyone correctly? I see some thumbs ups and some nodding. Fantastic. Okay, so yes, briefly what we want to explore here is how the main kind of video game streaming website, which is known as Twitch, and which is the kind of main site for this stuff in most countries, is increasingly using quite a range of gambling style systems to, like I say, to boost engagement, to boost user retention, and also to kind of strengthen links between broadcasters and viewers. So if you've not heard of Twitch, Twitch is a website / a platform on which a huge volume of people broadcast themselves live, mostly playing games. And prior to COVID, Twitch boasted somewhere in the range of 2 million people who regularly broadcast on the platform, and somewhere in the range of 100 to 150 million people who routinely viewed game streams on Twitch. Both of these figures have gone up since COVID. I don't know if the kind of exact post-COVID / during COVID figures are out yet, but both of these figures have risen for fairly obvious reasons, I think, during the crisis. And Twitch has turned into this kind of major, thanks to that PowerPoint, I didn't want to do that, has turned into this kind of major site for gaming culture and practice, and people broadcast all kinds of genres, all kinds of games, There's streamers from all kinds of countries and all kinds of demographics. And there's many thousands now of people on Twitch who make a full-time living by broadcasting their gaming content live on the platform, and many tens of thousands who make some money, but perhaps not a full-time job. And there is gambling itself broadcast on Twitch, such as things like people broadcasting real money poker or loot boxes and things of this sort, but those are not the focus of this talk. So what Twitch looks like, if you've not seen it, is this, and there's three main parts. You have the game, which is the main part of the broadcast on most streams. You also have, in most cases, a webcam in the lower left here, where you watch the streamer playing whatever game it is they are playing. And then also on the right-hand side, you have what's called Twitch chat, which is where viewers talk to the streamer and also talk to each other. So we did a project on this where we wanted to explore the role of gambling systems in Twitch's extensions. And extensions are these kind of extra pieces of code which alter what someone can do on their Twitch channel. So this might be things like linking to their other social media profiles, or some kind of system to automatically answer common questions from viewers, or something which will moderate their chat, or special sounds or special graphics, or ways to request things of the streamer and so on. And Twitch has a very kind of open infrastructure for accepting in new extensions. And for this project, and this is the paper, we looked at a little bit over 400 Twitch extensions which fell into these groups. And what we found was that Gamblification systems could be found in most of these groups, and that these are kind of increasingly common techniques for trying to engage viewers more closely in Twitch. And in essence, we found 5 kind of key themes here. The first was that some of these extensions fit most of the ways we would think about, in air quotes, gambling, but instead hold social rather than financial outcomes. So if you win, in air quotes, then say you win the option to choose what game the streamer plays next, say, rather than winning real world money, that type of thing. And the second was that lots of these sorts of extensions allow you to predict what might take place next in the stream or in some kind of off-stream event. And linked to this, a lot of Twitch channels have their own internal currencies now with which people can, in air quotes, gamble. The third of these, PowerPoint, please. The third of these is that some of these systems once more kind of meet most of the legal components of a gamble, but where the parts of this gamble are kind of assigned to different people within that stream. So you have somewhere the streamers and the viewers take on kind of different roles in terms of who makes the wager, who takes the chance of who might win the prize. And then the fourth is also lots of streams have raffles. And the fifth is that in lots of cases, these will use terms like addictive, which one is not in general, of course, allowed to use in gambling advertising, but which here within the gaming context are seen as being far more acceptable. And this is where you can go and find the full version of the paper which we're going to talk over this morning at tinyurl.com/twitchgambling. So that's the kind of brief intro to what we'll be speaking about today. And I thought from this point on, we just shift over to a Q&A.
Yeah, Brett, I don't know if there's a lot there, certainly. And, we try to cover, even like one academic paper in a, 60-minute conversation can be quite a bit. And certainly for one that's kind of just like all new content. So Brett, maybe if you want to just kind of react to that presentation first and just like, what should people really be tuning into as far as like, what are the most salient things to you as far as like this whole ecosystem?
As a co-author of that paper, my initial reaction is just about how truly fantastic I think that the authors have done with this manuscript. But I think some of the key points here are really just in how we approach subjects differently based on what our perspectives are. Those of you who've seen me give talks before know that I throw the shtick into just about everything that I talk about. But I think it's incredibly important. One of the things that I know Mark has worked on extensively, and Mark, I'm going to throw it back at you in a second here, is looking at how game developers approach this, and in this sense, how extension developers might approach this. With Twitch, for example, you really always have to be on. If you're a Twitch streamer, you have to provide entertainment in an ongoing way. If you need to get up to go to the bathroom, for example, in the middle of your, say, 12-hour stream, not an unusually long period for a stream that you might be doing on Twitch, what are you going to do to keep people entertained? We talk about channel flipping when back when we had channels and actually paid for cable and things like that. And what would happen when an advertisement came on? What happens when you're driving in your car and an advertisement comes on the radio? You go find another station where the music's playing, or you flip through the channels on the TV to find something better. And that's kind of similar to what happens on Twitch as well. If I'm going to get up to go to the bathroom and I'm not providing entertainment on my stream, then somebody's just going to go to another streamer. So these sorts of extension tools serve a specific purpose. They engage the person who's watching you create content, right? The whole idea is content creation. And so something that you can provide that will keep them entertained, maybe it's a mini game, maybe it's a raffle like some of those that we saw there. Maybe it's something that you've just provided, even if it's just an advertisement that floats there while they go off and do their own thing while you get up. These are the types of things that fill those gaps. So Mark, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about some of the monetization work that you've done in this space, but that might also help kind of fill in the gaps as well as to why somebody might want an extension like this one.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Brett. Yeah, so there's quite a kind of range of ways in which someone can make money on Twitch. And many of these ways are down to what's called bits, which is Twitch's sort of internal currency, basically, where you can buy bits and then you use bits to cheer for streamers who you enjoy watching. And this is kind of one of the two main ways in which streamers make cash, and the other being what are called subscriptions, which is where you agree to give a streamer either $5, $10, or $25 every month. And in exchange for that, you get a small little kind of badge by your name in chat. And that might seem like a really small thing, but one thing which we kind of drew out in the paper is that people are willing to pay, and by people I mean viewers, are willing to pay surprising amounts of money and put in surprising amounts of effort in order to gain kind of social status within Twitch chat channels. As most of the kind of social rank within Twitch channels comes from how many kind of little icons you have by your name in chat and what those icons are. So if you have an icon which shows you've been subbed to a channel for 3 years, then you have slightly more kind of social rank in that space than if you have one which shows you've been subbed for 1 month. And that in turn has more rank than someone who has not subbed. And the same kind of gamification type thing takes place for cheering also, where by someone's name you see how much money they've given a streamer, basically. And the more cash that they've given, the more status they have, and the more kind of likely the streamer is to mention that person's name or say hi to that person or build up this kind of sense of some sort of kind of parasocial link between you and them. And all of these sort of gambling-esque extensions, like Brett said, are built to basically kind of boost the extent to which people stay on your channel, to which they cheer for you, and to which they subscribe to you. And a lot of these, of course, are part of this kind of wider ecosystem of just things designed to keep you on a channel. And like Brett said, Twitch viewers are sort of incredibly loyal, but also sort of incredibly fickle as well. It's quite a strange thing where, like Brett said, if you go to the bathroom or you need to get a snack or you go and stretch or something as a streamer, some of your viewers will, I mean, some viewers stick with your channel if you fall asleep on Twitch and they'll just watch you sleep, as that's been known to happen. While other viewers, if you cease creating kind of gripping gaming content for more than 1 minute, they'll just think, stop this and move on to a brand new channel. So I think they do serve a kind of dual role of both trying to kind of deepen the commitment and the interest to that channel for those who are already linked in with that channel, but also trying to reduce the number of people who just drift off whenever you are doing a break or something like that. Yeah.
So let me just try to make sure that I understand like the way this whole economic ecosystem works. So unlike say the YouTube model where people might produce a video and then they're compensated by YouTube sort of indirectly for basically the number of views that's tied to YouTube ad revenue in some way. On Twitch, there's a more direct connection in the unit economics between the streamer and the viewers, where the viewers kind of compensate them in one of two ways. One is a subscription to their channel, which they pay on, say, a monthly basis, and two, some sort of elective token that they just hand out on a discretionary basis. Okay.
And then so, a third manner of just a straight donation. You donate to the streamer.
I see. And then
and strictly speaking, there's a few kind of other small ones too. Like some streamers will have click-through links to sites like Amazon, where if you click that link and then buy something, then the streamer gets a small bit of cash back. And some streamers are also kind of sponsored by big games companies also to play their games. Yeah.
I see. And so the way that this model set up is the streamer, their revenue is closely tied to engagement, and where these like gamblification elements come in is basically trying to maintain engagement over like potentially a very long period of time or during breaks in like the actual broadcast that they're doing, like say like a bathroom break. Is that right?
And that's a really great way of wording that as well, Kahlil, because it's not just engaging somebody while you're gone, it also continues through the actual gameplay. A lot of these tools, here I'll segue a little bit into the concept of the Twitch channel points, which actually came out in between the acceptance of the paper and the publication of the paper, because I think that's just the natural way of academe, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Things show up. But they're very similar to many of the extensions that we've written about, as Tina mentioned in this question here regarding integration of channel points and the third parties that existed before. Many of these can be integrated into the actual gameplay themselves. So for example, with the Twitch channel points and something that they've introduced called channel point predictions were set up by the actual streaming platform, whereas these third-party options were add-ons or extensions that you could get. And so they've done it so it's a dichotomous outcome and the streamer will set it. So the example that they actually use in their FAQ for streamers is, will I finish this whole pizza? Which has not just questions about, perhaps is this a gamblified thing, but perhaps you're eating maybe too many calories in one day as well. But that's the option, right? So it's dichotomous. Yes, I will finish the whole pizza. No, I will not. In a more gaming specific example, if you see we talked before, you know that I really enjoy playing Hearthstone, and right now Hearthstone Battlegrounds. So a dichotomous outcome could be, will I top 4 or will I top 8? And for those of you who don't know, top 8 is not very impressive because there are only 8 people playing at a time. But these are those dichotomous type of outcomes. And the streamer will set that question and the individuals can, it's bet, you're predicting, but you're predicting on one of 2 outcomes. You're risking these points. And that's one manner, for example, of how it could be integrated into the game itself. And I realize I've just gone a little bit down this trail. So I'm going to back up just a moment because, Kahlil, when you provided your summary description of how people might monetize these streams, the channel points are something then that comes into play. Is not necessarily something that's monetized, but it is an engagement mechanism. So a bit would be something that you purchase and then use in the stream. Maybe it's something where you donate to the streamer via bits versus via US dollars or Australian dollars, pounds, euros, whatever. Or you could use them you could purchase different things in stream, right? So the right to pick the next song that plays on the stream, you could use bits perhaps for something like that, or to enter a raffle, or to cheer, as Mark mentioned, is one thing you can do with them. Channel points you earn from watching the stream. So in some sense, it's sort of like the loyalty points versus the virtual chips that you might get in a social casino. They're separate currencies. They have different means of acquisition and different means of expenditure. And so these channel points are earned. You watch for a certain period of time, a little thing pops up in the corner of your screen and you say, yes, I'd like to collect these channel points. You can get more for connecting the watch. Like if you watch for a longer period of time, if you watch a stream multiple days in a row, you can earn these up, and then they're used for some of these engagement tools as well. And I think that that's an important element of this too, because it starts to get a bit more complex. There's not just one type of currency, if you will, and I'll call it a currency because these channel points, they can be used to acquire things. It's not necessarily a monetary currency because Twitch points definitely can't be exchanged for cash, but it's a way of acquiring something of value. As Mark mentioned, a lot of the time these items are used to acquire a social rank or social value within this community. When we talk about being able to show that you've been watching this streamer for 3 years, it takes me back, God, am I gonna be dating myself? It takes me back to people who say, well, I've been a fan of Pearl Jam since 1990, right? And so that's the kind, I really should have used a more recent example, but that's the kind of social value that somebody might put onto something like this. It's not a new phenomenon, but it's almost like the permanent record of that phenomenon. I could talk all day long about how much I've liked Pearl Jam and for how long, but this stream will actually have a record of how long I've been a fan of it. And I can use that to show people how cool I am.
Well said. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
I just want to, so there's like a whole lot of things to put together here. And first off, if you're a fan of Pearl Jam, by definition, it would have to be since the 1990s because nobody's been a fan of them recently. That's
like a stake to my heart.
Wow, people, harsh words.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I understand this technically. So, Mark, I'm going to try to recap what you said about like how these, I guess, apps, I forget what you called them, but basically apps that would plug into Twitch work. So you might have something like a prediction market, and that prediction market might be just like a very silly thing, like, will I eat this pizza? Amazon owns Twitch, right? And so the Twitch platform has some sort of API that developers can then create apps that would facilitate a streamer doing something like that prediction market. Like they provide the software that people can then use their bits to bet on. Is that right?
Exactly that. Yeah. The Twitch API is pretty open, and I'm told pretty kind of easy to use compared to lots of others, I'm told. And so kind of the extension market / space has grown pretty quickly, especially when we now see this kind of emergence of people whose full-time job it is to create stuff for other people's Twitch channels, to create kind of sounds or graphics extensions and so on. And so this has turned into a fairly kind of big market. And this also, I think, though, segues into Tina's question that I think, at least in part, that is what happened. But also, I think it's that the reason that Twitch shifted from having donations outside of Twitch to having bits was just the kind of simple fact that bits can be captured by Twitch to some extent, whereas if you pay through PayPal, then that can't be captured by Twitch. And so Twitch framed it as kind of it's a good thing now that money and bits and cheering are kind of linked into the platform, and you can buy them with your Amazon account and so on, and it's easy and it's a one-click purchase and so on. But the markup on bits is probably in most cases higher than you were paying when you donated via PayPal. And so I think what we have seen is this kind of platform capture process where Twitch as a company observe the most compelling extensions and then try to bring those into the platform itself for many kind of obvious reasons as well. Yeah.
And one thing I'm going to clarify too, Kahlil, you said it all perfectly. And then right at the end, there's one correction to make, which is that it's not the bits that are being wagered here. The bits are purchased for fiat with fiat currency. It's the channel points, or if you're using a third party, whatever points you may use. I would set up Abarbanel, which I just think rolls right off the tongue for
Absolutely.
my stream. Somebody else might create something else, some other type of point that they have. These are they're not worth anything. They're provided for, you earn them by watching the stream, you earn them for engaging in the chat box, but they can't be purchased with real money. And so that differentiation comes into play when we talk about gamblification versus actual gambling, because then we come into this part of the discussion that shows up pretty regularly, in which, is it money's worth? And in some cases it is, and in some cases it isn't. And most of these are not occurring. And I see a question from Luke here from Measuring. And and this, I think, comes into play as well. So there may be a measure of social value, but when we come into the discussion of, is it gambling or legal gambling? So, the case in which a regulator might want to get involved, even if there is a means of showing something like this willingness to pay concept, it would require a change in either gambling regulation or, in most cases, gambling law, because that's really where gambling is defined, and then the regulations set forth the means by which that definition is implemented. It would be really difficult to pull that in if social value is not something that is immediately translatable to monetary value. And that we saw quite a bit with some of the extensions that exist. Some perhaps existed. We saw lots of turnover even as we were doing the data collection in this project, and more so to today. But this has become a pretty big part of that puzzle. Is this extension legal gambling? Is it partially legal gambling? If it is, for example, there are charity giveaways like the ones that Mark mentioned in this presentation where it is legal gambling. You buy the ticket, there's a raffle, and then the prize is something of monetary value. It can be sold. Again, in Xbox 360, you're selling it, right? That's and so that, however, is usually carved out in gambling law. There are charity giveaways that have carve-outs, and they require special dispensation through whatever regulatory structure exists. But that is gambling, and we're not going to I'm not going to beat around the bush with that one. It just means that it fits under certain areas. So I think that it's a very, as Luke says, there's a tricky circularity with converting everything into dollars. And you're right, Luke, I totally agree. I think that that's something that's particularly difficult with these sorts of things. And it's, I often will say something along the lines of, at some point, the line needs to be drawn in the sand in defining what is and isn't, because at some point where everything we do in our lives is gambling. But with a lot of this stuff, that line isn't a hard and firm thing. It can often be just this nice big fat gray space that floats through this gambling and gaming concept, or even beyond that, general digital consumption these days.
Can I ask a question about the cultural impacts of this? And I want to frame it in this way. So when people talk about sports betting, and this has been a big conversation in the United States, part of it's just been about increasing engagement with the primary product, which is watching sports. and then, you know, for a certain class of people, it really just is about the betting, and, you know, slowly these two things are becoming conflated, and it's unclear what the trajectory of like the current gambling and sports culture is in the United States right now. It's something like that's interesting to think about in the context of this country, and it's obviously looks different from country to country. I guess I'm curious about where you see gamblification and these types of extensions. I think I got that right now. Where they fit in, you know, that type of model. Like, is this something that's going to become an integral part of this gaming streaming world forever, or is it just going to become more involved, or is it going to be something that basically starts to usurp the importance of, you know, watching esports as a whole? Maybe just comment on those elements and don't answer a specific question.
That's a big one. That's a big one. So I think first off, I think like we say in the full kind of paper, we don't necessarily think that there's a kind of slippery slope aspect to this necessarily, or it's far too early to say if there is, at least let's say that. But it's definitely, I think, kind of noteworthy that like so many games have unpredictability in them, right? In terms of what kind of creatures you face or what the world looks like or how AIs act and these sorts of things. And so kind of having to make decisions within kind of unpredictable spaces is in fact a really common thing in just normal gaming without any kind of gambling aspect. And so I don't think it's at all kind of coincidental that a platform for game streaming has found a lot of success with these kind of unpredictability focused channel engagement systems. I don't think that's a huge shock to us. But as for where this is going, I mean, Twitch has always had a kind of ambiguous position on gambling type stuff, in that for a while they kind of tacitly didn't really want people to broadcast gambling type stuff, and then they accepted people broadcasting poker because it's a skill game, of course, as well as a luck game, and now they kind of accept people broadcasting other stuff, and then for a while they kind of didn't like these sort of gambling type extensions, and now they're okay with them. But so kind of to be honest, I think Twitch's own position on this is one that I can't speak to what they think as a company, but if I had to guess, I get a sense that there's just a sort of general assumption that this stuff probably won't be noticed too much or won't be interrogated too much, I think. But I think if it does start to go that way, I think we might see changes. But also I think one thing which we talk through in the paper is how kind of, in some cases, there's every aspect of what in legal terms we would call a gamble, but where it's split across different people. And this is kind of quite a sort of weird, intriguing, quite new thing, where like one party spends the money on the gamble, but the other person gets the outcome of it. So like in Minecraft, for instance, there are these things called conflux cubes, where in essence a viewer can send one of these in-game objects to the streamer in exchange for money, and then the streamer opens that cube and sees what's inside it, and it could be good or bad or neutral. And so there we see kind of that the wager, the chance, and the outcome are kind of being split across different actors. And that's a kind of intriguing, quite strange thing which we see on Twitch, and which, whether on purpose or not, which does kind of allow these streams to kind of dodge around some kind of legal gambling restraints, I think. And then in terms of esports, I think with the kind of increasing role of kind of big corporate top-down actors in esports, I think it would be very surprising if we didn't see a greater sort of gambling engagement with esports as time goes by. In fact, when Twitch first pioneered bits and cheering, they didn't in fact do it just for kind of normal streamers. They had a system where when an esports contest was live, both of the players or teams would show up, and you could cheer for which player or team you wanted to win. and the money from that would go to their Twitch channels. But I think that in large part kind of fizzled out, just because with so many esports events, it's kind of hard work to have someone who is kind of stood by every second to update the cheering options. But I think a lot of this stuff, because it kind of dodges around legal restrictions, and as Brett said, sort of these terms are generally quite out of date to some extent. And in these kinds of spaces where we have all of these different kinds of currencies, and some cost money and some don't, and they engage in all these sorts of ways, and some can be wagered, some can't, some outcomes are money outcomes and some are not money outcomes, like very kind of traditional senses of what a gamble is, even in the online context, I think do need to be thought more about, I think, when we have these kinds of deliberately complex and quite social rather than necessarily purely financial systems.
Mark had a great segue into the angle I was going to take on your question. And I really like how this has opened up what really is a very complex approach to understanding what all these things are. Every time there's a new element of what could be gambling, maybe it's a gamblified game aspect, maybe it's a gamified gambling aspect. Maybe it's just some new means of a payment processor, right? There's so many different little elements of this that are continuing to innovate. So I would definitely say that if you're listening right now and you're going, what on earth is going on? That's normal. I mean, this is something that I look at every day of my life, and I still read through things every morning going, what is this, right? You know, this is the sort of thing where it takes a moment to figure out where it fits into this really massive and complex ecosystem. And I think that that really is demonstrated well in the question that Kahlil asked, and how very differently my mind went to an answer and how Mark's mind went to an answer, because Mark and I do a lot of work together. So typically we think very alike on these subjects, or at the very least our approach to these subjects are quite similar. So the complexity of this really is manifested in, when you ask this question, Kahlil, my first thought it goes to, well, what is esports, which is, of course, a huge topic, which could be its own session for many, many, many hours, but obviously it's not specifically relevant to TRG. Is that the correct order, Kahlil? I think that's Technology Risk Gather Series. Is that right? But the idea being that you talk about how gambling is now used to foster engagement in sports, and sports has had a terrible year. Engagement in sports, certainly in the US, is way down year over year, not just for 2020, 2021, but going the year prior. And even years prior to that, engagement in sports has been somewhat lackluster compared to years prior. And that's not quite the same as what would be going on here. I think one of the things to keep in mind with esports, and here I'll specifically focus, like Mark mentioned, on major competitive events, typically that come from AAA publishers, the big corporatized groups. If we go back to really the origins of esports, not all the way back, but to the origins of major esports, I mean, these competitions were started not to create a sport, but to encourage engagement in the game itself. They wanted to sell more copies of their games. And so they thought, okay, well, what we could do is we could show people who are really, really good at these games competing with one another, and that would foster more purchases on this end. And it's slightly different with, say, I'll use a very American example because, this is an international series, so why not? With the NFL, this is such an obnoxious American thing of me. But the NFL it wasn't created to get more people playing American football on the weekends, right? It was created to build a sports federation with a lot of power and generate a profit for the organization. And that's something that's very important in consideration of sport. Esports has started to evolve into that direction. What really began as a marketing effort to sell more games has become its own behemoth. It's the thing that people now come to. The numbers are out. Tons of people will watch these games, but not watch the esports who don't actually play the game. I'm one of them. There's certain esports I'll watch where I don't actually play the game. Mark as well, I see raising his hand. And so that's an important element here. And so the use of gambling to get people engaged with esports, I think, is on a similar trajectory. We see esports organizations who are sponsored by gambling entities. And so that's a little bit similar. When we look then at we've used Twitch, but I think it's important also to mention that there are a number of other streaming platforms, some of which have come and gone, even since we wrote this manuscript only 2 years ago or whatever it was. Adios Facebook Gaming, I suppose.
And Mixer.
And Mixer as well, yes. That these streaming platforms, they're animals unto themselves. It's almost as though that pickup American football game on the weekend is put then into an actual broadcast. That pickup game includes some of the best players in the world who will show up and you can interact with them. And then they engage in tools to keep you interacting with them in ways in which they can monetize you being there and being part of their circle and part of their community. And so I think that it's just a different approach. The monetization is there and it's generating engagement in a very different way. So this is something where I think there's a big kind of divergence in understanding sports and esports. And this is, one of the age-old questions that you'll see at like every single esports conference these days over the last 5 years is esports a sport? And there's always people on both sides who, Mark is tired of seeing this discussion. But it's really evolved. And in some cases, esports is, but this is a term that's kind of all encompassing. So if we're going to think about this much more in the video game streaming sense, it's a completely different model. And then if we think of this in terms of the streaming of these major events, it starts to look a lot more like what you've described with regard to sport.
I also see a query from Matt in chat about whether these sorts of things are more seen in games where kind of players talk about game odds and so on, or with strong players. I don't think that we've observed any kind of pattern of this sort as far as I can think. I mean, from kind of my own Twitch research, I've seen these sorts of things in the channels of really strong game players and the channels of far more kind of hobbyist game players. I've seen these in esports channels and non-esports channels. I think I have one thing which enables these sorts of gamblified extensions to work in lots of kinds of channels is this kind of weird dual role where much like streamers are much like viewers are very keyed into a certain channel, but also will leave at the drop of a hat. Viewers kind of take this sort of stuff very seriously, but also partly very not seriously. Like when you see viewers wait during channel points on some kind of outcome, based on what you see in chat, they seem to really care about winning the Abarba bucks within that channel, but they also seem to kind of make fun of it and make light of it and be like, oh, it's so stupid, it's so pointless, who cares? And so I think this kind of dual role, I think, allows people both to sort of feel it's acceptable to take this non-money gambling seriously, but it also enables them to feel okay if they lose a big wager, and it kind of reinforces that they haven't lost money, they've just lost like channel points, which don't mean much. And so I think kind of because you are only betting within that context for social value, I think it's something which appeals to a whole range of streamers. I don't think it has to be kind of strong players or esports players, but I think also how it's framed allows viewers to engage with it both without feeling too bad about it, but also without kind of being too drawn into it as well, I think. And so there's this kind of balancing act taking place there.
I agree. And the only thing I would add on to that too is I think, and I don't want to go too down the rabbit hole with the whole loot box discussion, but I think that as loot boxes have grown as a subject in the gaming community, and if you think they've become a hot topic in the gambling research world, you don't even want to look at the gaming community with regard to this subject. But in some ways, it's almost inured people to the concept of gambling, no matter how in depth they understand it or not. Some people just see any sort of RNG and think it's gambling, whereas others are very, very well versed in what is and isn't gambling. And so in some ways it's just our terminology and what we're used to. So for example, when Twitch channel points predictions first came out, I think it was November of last year, they really evolved very quickly into the chat asking for bets. We want, open up bets on this next game that you're playing, or when are you going to put up the next betting round? And they didn't refer to it as predictions because the way they're seeing it, you pick one side or the other, you're risking some of your channel points, well as gambling, right? So here, put up the bets. And so that's, it's kind of terminology that we're used to. And, I know that there's probably discussion around this on what's being normalized and what isn't. But also, I think it's important to keep in mind that this is also something that people are aware of. They are recognizing it as, oh, well, I am betting my channel points. My channel points might not be worth anything, but I'm still risking them on an outcome that's uncertain. And so perhaps this is gambling, and therefore here we are. And then I think it's also important there to recognize what Mark was saying. This may be something that's somewhat recognized within the streamers and recognized with the viewers as well, but it's also Twitch kind of grappling with what is and isn't gambling for these different types of extensions. They've really kind of figured it out for the streams themselves. They have poker, they have slots, but they don't necessarily, the terms and conditions are pretty broad, right? You can't stream something that's illegal. You can't stream illegal gambling. Well, great. There's so many questions that come out of that. But they still have at least set a line somewhere. Whereas with these extensions, that's not necessarily the case. So RNG may be showing up. They may be the source of that. Those types of extensions, they may be something that a third party has provided, but it's still a pretty complex thing that they're still trying to work through. And to go back to some of these other questions as well, is this something that third parties have thought about? Kahlil had mentioned regulators, for example, earlier, which is just that it may not even be something that they consider addressing until someone comes to them from a regulatory agency and says, hey, you got to change this or we're going to fine you. And so if something isn't very clearly gambling to a regulator, then we not even get to that point for any sort of change to happen. And these sorts of things might evolve with major change being driven by the community itself.
Yeah, it almost seems like this could potentially be like the beta for the future of like a large part of media and the internet. And by that, I mean, people talk about Web 3.0, which is so Web 1.0 was, your parents' internet, which was AOL and GeoCities. Web 2.0 was sort of the mobile revolution of everything. And then Web 3.0 is about kind of new technologies and their impacts on things like AI. One of the big ones is blockchain and smart contracts, but those really because they integrate money into code. And when you start to integrate money into code, then all sorts of different permutations of how people are exchanging value into just the regular experiences with devices and different products can change substantially, particularly when you can have a mechanism like these bits that are, very incremental and discretionary. But even if they don't have redeemable value in fiat currency, it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that's just slightly different than the Reddit model of you get, upvotes for, providing good content. Is that right? Is that a fair way to think about what's going on here? Is that there's just a lot of innovation that's happening around how people are interacting with entertainment and money, slowly merging on top of one another?
I think so. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it definitely for the viewer appeals to some of the same interests that an upvote on Reddit does, of course. But I think on Twitch, I think we do kind of have to focus on that sort of social aspect, on the fact that when you watch a Twitch streamer, in most cases you see inside their bedroom or at least inside their home, and you might see their pets or their partner, this type of stuff, or you might or like many streamers will kind of talk about their lives and their struggles and their past jobs and what they did at higher ed and this type of stuff. And so viewers get a real sense, I think, more than most kind of internet celebrities in air quotes, and more than upvoting on something like Reddit, you get a sense that as a viewer, you get a sense that you do know this person, that this person's a friend, that you have a sense of what their life is, and they sometimes talk with you as well. And so I think a lot of these things are different dynamics because it's giving money or giving support or giving kind of extra visibility to someone with whom you feel a meaningful connection, rather than a kind of random online stranger who posted a good link to r/funny or something. So I do think I do think that that social aspect is really crucial on Twitch, and I think it also serves again to make the kind of gambly aspects more acceptable, because you aren't kind of playing against some kind of massive casino corporation. You are playing, well, A, you are more playing with than playing against, and B, you are playing with a friend rather than against a big wealthy body. And so I think these sorts of things also kind of shape why these sorts of systems are seen, whether rightly or wrongly, as being okay on Twitch. And Twitch as a company, I think, also work quite hard to foster this sense that kind of Twitch is a big sort of friendly space, and it's a big family in some sense, and everyone's friends, and everyone wants to have fun. And like if you have a look on Twitch's website about how they talk about channel points predictions, the G word never comes up there. All they kind of talk about is how it'll kind of be fun and make you more engaged with the most exciting parts of a stream broadcast, and these sorts of things. And so it's all framed within this context of viewers making connections with streamers, whether those are kind of truly real or not is a side issue, but it's framed in that way, I think. And that, I think, does mark it out from liking and comments and upvotes and so on other platforms, because this is, or at least it feels like, a far more intimate connection with the person whose channel you are watching.
It makes a lot of sense. We're almost out of time, but I regret that I have not even asked the question about, you know, is there any evidence that people are developing gambling problems, you know, within these extensions or issues, or is that just kind of an unknown at this point in time?
I think Brett, do you want to, or shall I?
To my knowledge, the information hasn't even been captured. It could be,
yeah.
It's unknown.
Yeah. I mean, not to big up our own paper too much, but there's one paper on this, and we don't talk about that because we have no data on this. I don't think that there's any info on this right now, and I think it'll be a while until any of that kind of info can be captured, if it even can, because for kind of various reasons, researching viewers on Twitch is much harder than researching streamers or Twitch itself. And I think because of the kind of complexity of these sorts of systems, I think tracing will be trickier here than in some other spaces, perhaps. But yeah, right now, completely unknown.
and not to open up a huge can of worms right before we're about to start, but I think one of the things that will come up as we dig more into this is where certain disorders start to converge. So if somebody starts to develop a problem, is it a gambling problem? Is it an internet gaming problem? Is it just an internet consumption issue? And that's one of those points where the debate that I'm not going to get into, because I do not consider myself qualified on it, of how we define disorders. Are we going, I know there's one side or more multiple sides in this arguing, you know, are we getting too nitty gritty in this? Is somebody truly, you know, addicted to gambling, or do they have an addiction and underlying issues, and gambling is how it manifests? There's a whole lot to unpack there. I do not advocate for one or the other. I'm not a clinician and thus not qualified to do so. But I think it's important to recognize how that might show up. So it's possible, for example, that when people do data collection in streams, now speaking as a researcher, if you collect information on gambling problems, it might not be providing a holistic picture, because perhaps somebody's not going to be, you know, affirming some of the check marks on a problem gambling screen or problem gambling diagnostic tool, but they might on some of these other diagnostic tools. So any sort of research into this area, I think, really should accommodate really what you've described, Kahlil, which is this kind of digital convergence of concepts. It's gambling, it's gaming, it's money, it's digitization, and how all of these things come together. And so if there are problems that are rising, it's important to recognize that coming at it just from our gambling angle or just from a gaming angle might not necessarily tell the whole story.
That's great. Yeah, there's so many open questions in this space. So, you know, this is, you know, one of those topics where you can be quite jealous of researchers who have already got a foot in the door and are, you know, have a blue sea of exploration ahead of them. So I think we're near the end of the hour. So that's probably a great place to wrap up. You've already put up the link to your paper, and I think we can get that into the show notes, as well as both of your Twitter handles, so people know where they can get a hold of you. But for Sally, who wasn't able to come, I'm just going to thank you both, Brett and Mark, and also the Brain and Mind Center at the University of Sydney, as well as Tom Swanton for your help all this week to put this session together. And next week, we are going to have a whole new topic that touches on technology, gambling, and risk-taking, or those in a different order. So thanks everybody who showed up to watch the stream. And if you're watching this on a recorded, thank you too. And we'll see you all again next